Hello, everyone. So I'm Richard Myers. I'm going to talk to you today about decentralizing the last mile of mobile communication using mesh networks. Um, so the goal here is to see how we can improve both censorship resistance and privacy um, through of the last mile using mobile mesh networks. And specifically, I'm going to focus on Bitcoin, but this is something that can apply to any messaging protocol. But I'm using Bitcoin as an example because that's one that's relevant to this group, but also kind of interesting from a censorship and privacy standpoint. So I'm going to start by talking about some decentralized tools that you're probably familiar with, tools built on decentralized protocols. And then I'm going to talk about how those tools can be vulnerable to last mile attacks, specifically from ISPs and mobile carriers. Then I'm going to focus in on Bitcoin and how Bitcoin can be decentralized at that last mile away from the ISPs. And then I'm going to describe a tool that's been created that demonstrates this. And then hopefully I'll end with a demonstration. It's the first time I've done a demonstration live like this, so we'll see how it goes. But that's my phone beeping because it's not connected. So we'll see how it goes, but it'll be great. It'll be a little interactive. I have a couple of things here, so we can do it here in the audience. So these are the tools. You should be familiar with these. So we've got the Tor network. This is a way to gain communication privacy and anonymity. Bittorrent is a popular way to share popular content person to person that helps against censorship resistance. And then Bitcoin, which combines a little of both. It has both aspects of privacy, of communication, but also censorship resistance through distributing of the blockchain. And it's, I should say, the thing about Bitcoin is it's unstoppable value transfer. So that would be what it's trying to achieve. So the Great Firewall of China, persecution of publishers, turning off the internet in Turkey. These are some examples of how political, cultural, and technological speech is censored throughout the world. And these are just a few examples. You've got people who make these, like, what is it, Corey, I forget his last name now. No, the guy who made the guns, the Defense Distributed, you know, Cody Williams. So he's an example of, it's a technology, it's a blueprint for a gun, but it's censored for various good reasons. But it's just an example of how these things can be censored through centralized places. And how do these tools solve that? So BitTorrent allows you to share directly between people. So rather than having a single server that is sharing some sort of censored content, everybody shares it with each other. So that's a way to get around that. And then with the Tor network, you can hide the source of that censored content, and that allows that content to survive and be propagated. Bitcoin allows you to make censored transactions, so it's a little different concept there, but things that maybe a bank would not allow, or PayPal would kill your account if you tried to use them. That's what Bitcoin allows you to make censorship-free payments or transactions. So Snowden's revelations proved that the cypherpunks' worst fears about privacy had actually come to pass. China's social credit system is an example of what unchecked domestic surveillance eventually leads to, which in the best case is self-censorship, but in the worst case is that you have extortion and targeted harassment caused by that asymmetric power that comes from ubiquitous surveillance. And it's not just governments, it's companies also that have an undue influence based on their ability to censor, either against the competition or against their own customers. So encryption alone is enough to get you a certain amount of privacy. But what you get from Tor is you get actually privacy of your metadata. So that's the advantage you get from Tor, is that it's who you speak with and and when you speak with them, things like that. And Bitcoin gives you a similar privacy, but now it's not just who you talk to, but it's where you spend your money, how you make your money, aspects of like where you shop, how much you earn, how much you have in the bank. So these are actually some of the most intimate private details about your life that you're able to get with something like a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. But ultimately, freedom is how you control the means of your own labor, your own actions. And things like capital controls, hyperinflation, trade restrictions, and weak privacy rights, these are all characteristics of a tyrannical society. And Bitcoin can't be stopped at arbitrary borders. It can't be debased by central banks. It's not restricted with whom you exchange it. And it gives you an unprecedented level of ownership over the value that you've accumulated or earned from your efforts. And if you look at the Bitcoin network, these are all those purple nodes are Bitcoin nodes, and that's the decentralized network. And you can see it's obviously in the Western Europe and US most concentrated, but it's very globally distributed. So you could say from a distributed standpoint, Bitcoin is a distributed network. But if you look at any particular local place, there's only a handful of small domestic carriers, often national monopolies in many countries, which are your on-ramps and off-ramps to the internet, which is your on-ramp and off-ramp to this decentralized network. So while the network is distributed, in any given location, it can be highly restricted. I gave the example earlier of Turkey. They were having protests, so they turned off the internet. This is just an example of of where these networks are weak, or where a weakness is. And it's not just the centralized carriers, it's a centralized infrastructure is prone to natural disasters. In Puerto Rico, their landline communication was 80% destroyed, and I think it took over a year to be fully back operational. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that these networks are centralized infrastructure, and so they're not resilient. And they also don't serve. So one other point here is, not only are they not resilient, but they don't well serve what we'd say like last mile or marginalized communities. Because they're centralized, they tend to be centralized in where they have good service. And also, of course, as I alluded to before, these networks are very easy to surveil by centralized monopolies. It's much easier to lean on one carrier who's got millions of dollars of fixed infrastructure and have them surveil somebody for you than it would be to follow around every single citizen in a city and see what they're up to. So it gives you that central point of control and central point of surveillance, essentially. So this is interesting. Snowden revealed that before he revealed himself as a whistleblower, he went around in the island where he was living in Hawaii, and he mapped out all the open ISPs in his area. So if you know what that is, an open ISP, it'd be like a Wi-Fi connection without any password. Because even though he was very familiar with the technology of Tor and everything else out there that's to do with privacy, he knew that where you connect to the internet is a weakness in your own personal privacy and security. So he made this map so that he could communicate from places that had no association with him personally, and where, so that it would be harder to figure out what he was up to. And these last mile attacks have serious consequences. You can look at Ross Ulbrich, if you know who he is. He's the guy who started Silk Road. He's in jail for life, and a lot of how he was caught was through tracking of the last mile communications and figuring out where he was at. The IRS has made requests to Coinbase. If you trade Bitcoin, there's a Bitcoin exchange called Coinbase. And the IRS didn't just want to know who their customers were, they wanted to know where they were logging in from, because this is how they track, people's transactions. Snowden also revealed, as far back as 2013, the NSA had a very active program to trace Bitcoin users and record their data. So even if you weren't under investigation for anything, that data is still being hoovered up and stored somewhere in a mountain for later scrutiny. And so even years later, decades later, this information is still around, and they can still around and still able to track you. So the central theme in all of these vulnerabilities are as I said earlier, centralized communications, either from direct censorship or just from the metadata logging that gets stored. And the most dangerous thing that the most dangerous part of the attack is that somebody can associate a pseudonymous identity you might have with your true name. If you haven't read this book, I recommend it actually, True Names. This is from like the 70s. It's a very old book. But the point is that linking who you are in real life with your pseudonymous digital identity is a big risk in many ways. So how do we decentralize communication technology? What communication technology can help us decentralize these last links? And an important point is that there's no silver bullet. It's not there's one technology that's going to solve this. It's going to be multiple levels. And yeah, radios, I guess I meant to say here that radio technology is probably something that holds the most promise, because it isn't something that has to be dug into the ground and placed somewhere. It's over the air, and it gives you sort of a physical separation from a digital communication and your physical location. So, but for any radio-based solution, the limiting factor is going to be the data rate. So in the case of a Bitcoin transaction, I don't know how many of you understand sort of the technology of Bitcoin, but every 10 minutes it creates a block of data, and that's all the transactions. Like think of all the Visa, in Visa you've got all these transactions. Well, in Bitcoin you've got a bunch of transactions, and they're put into blocks. Each transaction is pretty small, so 373 bytes. That's a relatively small amount of data. It's short, bursty kind of data. And then every 10 minutes it's all put into a block and stored on a database or multiple databases, and that's 1.8 megabytes. That's getting to be a lot of data to share over certain radio connections. But then there are things like block headers. A block header, I won't go into the details, but if you do you can trade off trust for data. So block, you can basically receive not the full block, but you can receive some portion of it and trust somebody who provides that data in order to reduce the amount of communication. And then there's these other technologies I won't go into, but just to say there are technological ways to reduce the amount of data that gets transmitted. In 2014, a project called Crypto Radio was started in Finland, and they used digital satellite TV actually to send out block information. They ran that for 2 months, and I think they were able to reach about 5 million Finns, so most of the population of Finland. And it was a good program. It was a good proof of concept, and what it meant is that you could be out in the forest somewhere without any data connection and have a cheap, low-cost kind of off-the-shelf receiver and still be able to receive and confirm Bitcoin transactions. So it would be like if you had a Visa terminal, but you could be anywhere and get payments essentially. And then in 2017, Blockstream, which is a Bitcoin company, they announced a program where they were broadcasting the same block information but over satellite. And eventually, when it's fully rolled out, they'll be able to reach, I think they said 90% of the population. So you could be in the middle of the Sahara Desert and have a pretty low-cost satellite receiver and then be able to receive this blockchain data. But both of these projects suffer from the fact that it's still somewhat centralized. You still have the uplink for your satellite, or you have the satellite, or you have the digital TV transmitter. So if you were going to have a problem with censorship in a particular country, then of course the digital TV wouldn't work. And if the country with your uplink has a problem, then you would also have a problem with censorship, for example. So in 2017, also at Scaling Bitcoin, Nick Szabo and Elaine Au announced a project using high-frequency radio. And this basically uses what they call Skywave technology, where they bounce a signal, it's a very low power transmitter, and they bounce it off the ionosphere, and they can get hundreds of kilometers with this technology. It's very low bandwidth, but they can go bidirectionally. But unfortunately, this is still kind of hacker technology. It's not something you can just go to a store and buy. But it sort of shows the right way to go. So this is a goTenna mesh. goTenna makes a consumer mobile mesh network. So these are focused on short, bursty data, and they have great distance. So they focus on great distance and off-grid communication. So no cell, no Wi-Fi, no SMS communication. It's purely radio to radio. And it's a mesh, which means that it doesn't just go from me to you, it can hop over multiple people to extend the range. And the message, it's got free messaging. They're pretty inexpensive. It's like $80 or so in US. I don't know what its exchange rate is right now. It connects with your Android phone. So it goes Bluetooth to your Android phone. So you use it just like any messaging app. So just like Signal or WhatsApp. You can send messages over this mesh network. And it's end-to-end encrypted. If anybody knows about radio, it's using the UHF spectrum. So that's an unlicensed spectrum. So that means you don't have to be a ham operator to do it. And the idea is that it could work when nothing else does. So whether it's a disaster or whether it's censorship, it still works. That's the idea. So yeah, so I was going to say, so the network works by relaying across multiple hops. So it doesn't just go from person to person, it goes from person to person to person until it gets to the destination. So these are an example of nodes that, mesh nodes that are there. You can see here in Sweden, we don't have too many. These are all self-reported though, so there could be more, there could be less. It's not like it's tracking you. You have to go onto the website and put a pin and say, this is where I'm at. But you also decide your own global ID. That's, I think, an important point. So if you get a cell phone, well, I don't know how it is here in Sweden. I think you can be somewhat anonymous, but generally your person, who you are as a person is connected with your SIM card ID. But here you can basically pick whatever ID you want and you can rotate it every 5 minutes if you want. So that's another privacy feature there. The advantage of something like this is range. So I'll go by this quickly, but within about a 5 by 5 kilometer range, if you had 25 randomly moving people, which is like Midtown Manhattan area, you could have a fully like multi-connected mesh network. So that means that, for relatively low price, you could cover a large area. Whereas if you're using LTE or Wi-Fi Direct, which maybe is built into your phone, you would need hundreds or even thousands of dollars more, hundreds of thousands of dollars actually, to have that same level of connected mesh network. So that's why mesh range is important. Go ahead. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so it's not IP, I assume
No, it is not IP. It's its own protocol, but you can think of it more as like we say short bursty data. So you're sending literally a packet of data with a message.
how does the routing work? Is your ID your
Yeah,
address,
your ID is your address. So you do have to have some way.
is it scalable?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, you know something about mesh networks. That's been a problem. I mean, mobile networks, mobile mesh networks. That's always a challenge. But I mean, I could give a different talk on the routing. But there is what they call zero overhead routing that they use, and that does allow you to scale. Now, somebody asked me last time I gave this talk, could it scale to like 1 billion people? And probably the answer is no. It's going to have to be a multi-tiered network. So you probably are going to have local areas with a mesh, and then that might go to a gateway that goes to a longer range type of communication, which goes to maybe some backbone, which is wired. I mean, so there are many, many levels to this network, the way it would have to work. So we had this question, could you use mobile mesh networking to decentralize some application like the Bitcoin transaction? Because Bitcoin transactions are also short bursty data. When you make a payment, it's a short burst of information. I said there was 300 bytes or 400 bytes, and that's it. So it's well suited to this particular kind of radio. And there's a company called Samurai Wallet. So they make a Bitcoin wallet, and they were also interested in these projects. They had something called this Mule Tools. So they were looking at different approaches to sending Bitcoin transactions. So they were actually inspired by the Blockstream satellite to just iterate on different ways you could send this information. One that I thought was interesting, I was describing to Mats Eric earlier, is they have it called message in a bottle. So the idea is you can send a transaction as a message in a bottle and include some information so whoever finds the bottle can get paid for putting it on the Bitcoin blockchain. So this is just some of the crazy things you can do using the cryptography of Bitcoin and blockchains generally. So the result was TxTenna. So TxTenna, I'll try to give you a demo of that in a minute. And what it does is it allows you to sign a transaction and send it over the Bitcoin network, but over the mesh network. So at the Hackers Congress in Prague about a month ago. We just announced this. It's an open source project, so anybody can build on it. They can make changes, and yeah, I think it's going to be, it's very early, but I think it's going to be an exciting proof of concept that shows that you're not reliant on that last mile communication to do this. So I think I have here. Yeah, so I'll give you just a quick rundown on how it works. I think we're getting a little high on time here. Yeah, how are we going? Let's see. Oh, I got time. So, so the idea is this would be your Bitcoin wallet here. So I make a transaction, and the key of sending a transaction in any sort of blockchain protocol is to sign the transaction. So there's a digital signature. So your mobile, that's all done in this mobile Bitcoin wallet. But once it has the signed transaction, your 400 bytes of data, it then launches TxTenna. And TxTenna is what's connected to the mesh network. And it then sends it over the mesh network until it gets to a node somewhere else that has internet connectivity. So this phone doesn't have internet connectivity. It goes over the mesh network till it gets to a gateway phone, which does have internet connectivity, or SMS. And then once it gets to this online phone, it can then send it to the Bitcoin blockchain, and the Bitcoin blockchain will then do what it does. It'll, over the internet, it'll confirm that transaction, and then anybody who's receiving that payment could just go on the internet and check and see that that payment has been confirmed. And then feature I just is just available, so I hope it works tonight when I show you, is that gateway phone can also send a message back through the mesh network. It's not an authoritative message, so it's just you can get a confirmation back that says that transaction is now confirmed on the blockchain. I mean, I can get into this more later. I wouldn't, if I were the payment receiver, I wouldn't necessarily trust that because you don't have any cryptographic proof that it was confirmed. But if you're standing out somewhere without internet connectivity, you might just like to know it got through. So that return receipt is an important feature. So what have we achieved? So it's a consumer-friendly solution for routing around censorship, and it gives you a full end-to-end alternative for sending and receiving Bitcoin payments. So it's a proof of concept, but it actually is something that you could use if you were at a concert someplace without, or you're out in the forest or something like that. If you were in a situation, you actually could use this using fully off-the-shelf consumer technology right now. So I think it's kind of interesting. This is just a Mule Tools is the project. So if you find this stuff interesting, Samurai Wallet, who developed this app, has this and others in their Mule Tools repo called on GitHub. So you can check that out. And now I'm going to try to do a demo. Does anybody have any questions before I get set up? Yeah.
So there's a mesh network, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah.
So what if a government just creates an interceptor or a sniffer in the middle of that mesh network?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a government. It could be anybody who's interested. Organized crime, anybody like that. Sure.
How does it combat that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's encrypted, so it's end-to-end encrypted. So they would only see there's data transferring from place to place. Now, maybe they could use the metadata, perhaps, to try to track you. But I mean, what would you hear if you had a radio listener somewhere? You would hear a packet. That's what you would hear. I mean, you would just know something came by, but you wouldn't necessarily know within 1.6 kilometers where, unless you had 3 radios, perhaps. So I mean, it's basic. I mean, it'd be, I suppose, I'm not probably the expert on this. I'm not a radio guy, but the idea is it expands where you could be to a large region, and also you've got multipath effects. So it's not like you could definitely be sort of identified precisely as you could with a SIM card in your phone, which could give you like your precise location.
But I still think
Yeah.
that it can still find you out by triangulation.
Probably, if you're not moving. Yeah, if you're not moving and you're sending a lot of data, they probably could. Yeah, yeah. That's basic physics. I mean, it doesn't matter what you broadcast in that case. If you're yelling out something and somebody's got 3 nodes around you and they're trying to close in, sure. I mean, I wouldn't use this in North Korea today. I think I want to look for other solutions, but But if nobody's looking for you, or if they don't know where you are to begin, if they know where you are to begin with, then maybe that's a problem. But if they don't know where you are, they have to be listening all the time, and then you send one transaction. It's like one piece of information. It's going to be more difficult for sure. So, but it's a good point. I mean, if you're thinking about operational security, there's a lot of ways it can go wrong, I'm sure. Um,
Just curious.
no, it's a good point. Yeah.
Is it possible to just connect phone to phone directly instead of going around and using this device?
Yeah, so if you were using other technologies, so if you didn't want the device, you could use, like I said, Wi-Fi. There's also something called LTE Direct, but those have much slower range. So they have higher bandwidth, so you could stream HD movies over your Wi-Fi. This, you can't stream HD movies. You probably couldn't even stream too many pictures. So there's a trade-off with range, and it's not a linear relationship. It's like super linear. It's exponential sort of advantage to having more distance, because it's like the square of the distance of who you can connect to. So that's sort of the trade-off you have. Now you could build this into a phone. They're actually the company that makes these that I work for. They actually, Google has a project, or they had a project where they had these little squares you could build a phone and add modules, but then Google canceled it. So back to the drawing board on that one. Um, but sure, you could imagine this being built into the phone at some point. It's not, it wouldn't be hard.
So you can't use the GSM and then not connect to antenna, right?
Um, I'm not sure I followed you there.
Like regular GSM network is
Yeah, so that would be like,
range.
yeah, you could do that. So GSM, like GSM phone to GSM phone, but I don't think there's any protocols around it. That's part of the problem with mobile phones, is that the carriers kind of control the phone technology, and they're not really incentivized to create peer-to-peer solutions, because after all, they make their business from you talking through their towers. So, I mean, maybe somebody someday could make an open hardware solution. I mean, that would be great. I'd love to see an open, I think there are projects like that, but of course nothing at the moment. But that would be the ultimate idea, would be to make a phone that was completely made for this kind of purpose. And then you don't have to use, I mean, this is unlicensed spectrum that is being used. If you could use licensed spectrum, then you could have much higher bandwidth and higher range. You could use some of these GSM or LTE, but you got to pay billions of dollars to get that spectrum in the US. I'm sure it's the same here in Sweden. It's not like free spectrum. So if you want to do that unlicensed, somebody's got to pay.
So like you guys make a new phone that can use GSM.
Yeah, or that has the protocols that allow you to talk person to person. They're usually not made to do that on purpose. So, I mean, also they don't want you to use their spectrum. They don't want you to broadcast on GSM, because if I'm the owner, if I'm Ericsson and I own that spectrum, or whoever, the Telia, if I own that spectrum, I don't want just you messing up my network. So it's more than just the technology. It's the right to use a particular spectrum is also important.
Is it must be the person to buy this kind of phone instead of buying a separate device?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, but like I said, you have to find a frequency that is allowed to be used without a license too. But there, I mean, I'm sure people are working on that too. But the basic point you're making though is, how do you get more people to do it? How do you get more people to use it? And I think that's happening in many different ways. It's about finding different uses. I mean, Bitcoin transmission is maybe a very niche use, but there are other people who use it for hiking or disaster preparedness, and there are people who use them in gliders, because no, you can't get cell phone reception up there. So they use it to communicate glider to glider to make sure they don't collide. So there's many different ways to get people using the technology until you get a kind of critical mass. Let me. Yeah.
Can you use GoTenna with laptops or?
Well, it's funny you ask. They're just starting out beta tests where you can plug this in via USB, or even to a Raspberry Pi, and they'll make an excellent gateway, for example, something you could just leave powered on all the time to be a gateway to the internet. So absolutely, good question. Yeah.
Can you also like send arbitrary information then, like for example,
Yeah.
like
So there, I took that slide out. So there's a free public SDK. So you can have for Android, iOS, and then soon Python on a PC. And the Python is in beta testing, so it'll be out in, I can't say when, but soon. I've used it. It works really well.
but it's not like then that you could just like basically like when you connect to Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
you can just use your regular internet as is. Like you don't have to write something so that you can use it on this.
Well, you would have to, yeah. So I mean, if you use the SDK, like you were saying earlier, it's packet-based information. So it's not like you're just sending IP data. You actually are connecting making a connection and then sending data of a certain size. I forget the exact size. I want to say 260 byte packets. I mean, you can send more than one, but it isn't just like connecting to the IP stack and sending data. So it's more limited. But you can do things you can't do with IP, or you can't like normally. You can send broadcasts. You can send everybody within a certain range, for instance. So it's a little different idea. It varies. I mean, we say in an urban environment with lots of tall buildings, maybe 800 meters, which is still a lot better than your Wi-Fi. But I was out around my house and I could get like 6 kilometers. So, and we have people up in, if you're up in the sky, line of sight, you can get many more than that even. So it's really just depends on your environment. But um, it's made for range, and the limit is mostly about your environment. So. Well, it depends on how much you're sending and receiving, but like if you charge this thing up, it'll last at least a day. It's sort of rated for 24 hours. And it's also got a relay mode, so you can hang it in your window, not connected to any phone or computer, and it'll just relay all day long without you doing anything. In fact, just anytime you've got it turned on and connected to your phone, it'll relay, but also if you just put it in this relay mode, it'll just relay. I can show you a little bit now if I can get my app to work here. Let's see. I'm gonna move it over here a little. I got spyware. Okay, so who wants to be the guinea pig and be the other side of this? Okay, you want to try it? Let's see. So I got to turn it on. So it sort of pulses there. And now let's see if we connect. Pair device. Okay, I think there are 3 beeps. Good. Okay, so I'll do one thing here. I'm just gonna, no, that's good. No, it's supposed to go off. Let's see if this works. So I have a transaction made already. Normally you would do this through the phone, but it's a little too much trouble. So when I tell you, you can say goTenna mesh, and that'll send the transaction from your radio. Just make sure I've got this one turned on. Okay, so I guess I can do it this way, can't I? So that just shows that it's connected. Like I said, normally you would have your mobile phone, you would be running an app that's got your Bitcoin wallet, you would make a transaction, you'd hit send. So what he's going to do is going to simulate sending from an offline. So that has no Wi-Fi or no mobile data, that pad. But my phone here that you're looking at, I hope, has connection. Let's see. Yeah. Did it close? Oh, no, it's okay. Oh, that closed. No problem. Just paste in the memory here. Okay. Okay, so I'll hold this up. We could be much further away, but go ahead and hit send and let's see what happens. Okay, I think I saw mine beep a little bit. It cleared the screen. Let's see. It received a transaction. Oh, there. Okay, so this is the data. This is just for debugging. You can see the data coming across. It'll come over in about 4 packets of data. It takes a little while. I think there's a few. I'll leave it there. Oh, shoot. That was just the twitchy cable here. Yeah, it should show the transaction here, but let me get this up. Stupid USB-C cable. It's the problem with new technology. Whoa. Oh, do you have to do the alarm? Oh, yeah. Well, I might just have to. Hmm. I guess I need a different technology here. Well, it didn't. I wonder if it killed the app when it killed the screen there. Let's try again. What's that? Oh, there. Actually, it just upped. So there on yours it shows that it confirmed it. And actually, if I can get this to show now, you can see. So it says broadcast to the Bitcoin network. So that's the first thing you see is that it broadcasted to the Bitcoin network. Still, I don't know why it hasn't updated on the screen here. I'm not going to touch it. But on his over here, it says that it's actually, oh, I sent it again. That's why. Okay. Oh, there. Now it says confirmed on the Bitcoin network. So the first message just showed that it broadcasted, but it hadn't been confirmed. But this is an old transaction I did earlier today. So it immediately confirmed. It immediately could check it and see that it was confirmed. So that's the return receipt coming back. So that's it. So I mean, it doesn't seem like much, but this is a Bitcoin transaction. It could be a message saying something. It could be your location. It could be, anything like that that you want to keep private. So that's it. I think that's all I got. And I encourage you to go to TxTenna.com if this is something you think you want to try, or go to the GitHub page and hack around with it if you're of that mind. That's it. Thanks, guys.